You thought you knew how to play the game? But no one has played this hard, this fast, this real, until now. Come, look into the world of Sega Saturn. Sega Saturn.
Hello everyone, welcome to Retro Dad and Modern Lad, the YouTube channel and soon to be website. Today's video is going to look at the evolution of Sega Saturn 3D games, focusing on the key areas of the launch games, second wave of games and late release games. We will then take a look at the unrealized potential of games if the system had been around a few more years. Of the launch titles available, the early 3D of the Sega Saturn can best be observed in Virtua Fighter, Daytona USA and Panzer Dragoon, so let's take a closer look. Virtua Fighter was a launch title in Japan in 1994, America and Europe in 1995, bringing the popular arcade Model 1 game to the home on the Sega Saturn. The game is a good port, but it's not arcade perfect, with a slight downgrade in graphics, particularly the backgrounds, lower resolution and also load times. The game plays really well though, with good controls and game speed, but a combination of rushing the game out for the Saturn launch and development team getting used to the Saturn hardware led to bugs in the game such as flickering polygons, stage glitching and camera jerking. Virtua Fighter was well received in Japan and had solid sales, but by the time it came to America and Europe it was starting to look dated, especially with magazines being how people got the game and information back then, and with pictures of Virtua Fighter next to PlayStation's Toshinden it made the Saturn look underpowered, but gameplay wise Toshinden wouldn't have even lasted a round against Virtua Fighter. Daytona USA was a launch title in America and Europe, bringing home the Sega Arcade Model 2 board game. In similar nature to Virtua Fighter, the game played really well with great handling, but the game was also clearly rushed for the launch, and again the developers were still getting used to getting the best from the Saturn hardware. The arcade game ran at an ultra smooth 60 frames per second and boasted the best graphics at the time, but the Saturn version dipped to 20 frames per second. It also had poor in-your-face draw distance and frame rate. Graphics had also taken a big hit, but the game came with a 2-player split screen and extra cars. While it was unrealistic to expect an arcade perfect conversion, the Saturn was certainly capable of a better port, and eventually received this in the way of Daytona CCE. Similar to Virtua Fighter, magazines were putting in pictures of Daytona next to Ridge Racer, whereas the arcade Ridge Racer was in Daytona's shadow. In the home console, Ridge Racer was the better port. Panzer Dragoon was a launch title in America and Europe and is a 3D on-the-rails shooter with the ability to rotate the camera 360 degrees and enemies to attack from all sides. The game is perhaps the best early indication of how using 3D in games could enhance the playing experience. The game may look a little rough around the edges now, but I remember seeing the game and being amazed at the new 3D games the Saturn could produce, especially compared to the Mega Drive games before it. The game is fast and frantic like an arcade game, is one of the Saturn's best loved series. The game runs at 20 frames per second, and while there is pop-up it doesn't hinder the game. After the initial launch of the Sega Saturn, a bit of a games drought followed, but fortunately big improvements on the launch games were just around the corner and arrived in the 1995 Christmas holiday season, as Sega released its next 3 arcade games on the Sega Saturn hardware, in the case of Virtua Fighter 2, Sega Rally and Virtua Cop. And after reading the official Sega Saturn magazine religiously for months, Christmas 1995 is the day I finally got up and found I had a Sega Saturn. It didn't disappoint and became my favourite system ever, so let's take a closer look at Virtua Fighter 2, Virtua Cop and Sega Rally. The biggest compliment you can give Virtua Fighter 2 is it's so improved on Virtua Fighter 1 Saturn, it almost looks like it's running on a different console generation above the first one. It's improved vastly in every area, now running at an ultra smooth 60 frames per second using texture mapping for more lifelike graphics. The game used AM2's Sega Graphics Library development tools. The game received universal praise from magazines, and despite Virtua Fighter 2 being a great port and closer to the arcade Model 2 version than many had expected, it still had some noticeable differences with slightly downgraded graphics, and despite being a massive improvement on Virtua Fighter, the backgrounds in Saturn version are 2D, while in arcade they're still 3D. Also, some stages are altered, like Shun's being static instead of floating down the river and under bridges. It was amazing to think that just in a few short months the Sega Saturn had gone from launching with a game that was struggling to do Model 1 technology of the arcade to doing a really good port of Model 2 arcade technology. A lot of Sega Saturn games have aged badly, but this game still looks and plays like a dream even to today. After the underwhelming Daytona port, could Sega right the wrongs with its next arcade to home port in Sega Rally? The answer to that is a resounding yes, running at 30 frames per second and a much improved draw distance, great graphics, superb handling and multi-terrain levels. Sega Rally was again universally praised, with all the magazines awarding it high scores. Some adjustments to the game did have to be implemented to get it on the Sega Saturn, with the slight downgrade in polygon count, texture quality and also no rear view mirror. But the Saturn port had an excellent 2-player mode and other exclusive options such as changing the car settings, time attack, ghost car of your best lap. I put many hours into shaving tenths of a second off my lap times in this game and learning the ins and outs of each track. The main downside to the game is it only features 2 normal cars and 1 unlockable, and 3 tracks and 1 bonus stage, giving a total of 3 cars and 4 tracks. A cheat can be put into the game to give mirror mode, which mirrors the tracks. Check out the channel's Sega Rally review, which also gives the mirror mode cheats if you like this game. As well as getting used to the Saturn hardware and not having to rush the game, I also think the track design in Sega Rally helped to keep the draw distance less noticeable, as unlike Daytona there aren't a lot of straights with big objects showing. The tracks have many twists and turns, keeping the far distance often out of view of the player. Despite being released early in the Saturn's life, Sega Rally was the best racer to hit the Saturn in my opinion. Also released around the same time was an arcade conversion of Virtua Cop, a light gun game. The game could be purchased on its own and played with the Sega Saturn pad, or purchased with the Sega Saturn Stunner. The Sega Saturn version is a very faithful port of the arcade version, with slightly lower polygons. Out of the 3 arcade ports released in Christmas 1995, it's probably the closest to arcade perfect. The game really comes into its own if you've got 2 Sega Saturn Stunner arcade guns and play 2-player. Although in this day and age it's becoming harder and harder to play it like that because you need a CRT TV. The game features the 3 levels from the arcade version, easy, medium and hard, with each level also getting more graphically impressive as they go on. The Saturn version also has a training mode to practice, and the real replay value of this game is trying to get 100% accuracy on each section of the levels with limited lives. Each level finishes with a boss, and Virtua Cop introduced elements such as enemies reacting to where they were shot and how many times they were shot into 3D arcade style shooters, with more points given for high accuracy shots such as headshots and disarming the enemies. Other 3D games of note to graphically impress over the following year were mainly from Sega, including the incredible Nights into Dreams, which also introduced the 3D controller. Virtua On, a mech shooter conversion from the arcade, which could be purchased with its own twin arcade stick accessory. And Virtua Cop 2, which was a similar upgrade to the one from Virtua Fighter 1 to Virtua Fighter 2, with much improved graphics, faster paced levels and more action, and alternative routes. Panzer Dragoon 2 also vastly improves on the original and provides some of the best 3D environments on the Sega Saturn, a faster pace, more varied and detailed level design, with multiple routes and the ability to evolve your dragon, but the game was still limited to on the rails. As the life of the Sega Saturn drew to a close, we saw another evolution in 3D games, with games now allowing for far more freedom of movement, new graphical techniques being used to push the hardware of the Saturn to the limits. 3 games that demonstrate this best are Sonic R, Burning Rangers and Panzer Dragoon Saga. The Sega Saturn 3D controller is my favourite of all time and was vital to be able to control later games in their large 3D environments with precision. This controller was also obviously the inspiration behind the Dreamcast controller. The Sega Saturn may have started slow but was now producing some of the best 3D games anywhere on a home console. Unfortunately, third-party support was all but gone, and the Sega Saturn had been well beaten sales-wise by both the N64 and the PlayStation in the West. Despite doing well in Japan, but for those of us that were there at the end, we were rewarded with some fantastic games. There's never quite been a game that divided opinion quite like Sonic R before. People seem to love it or hate it. I think it's great. The main complaint is the controls, and they do take a bit of getting used to. But with a combination of practice and using the 3D controller, this game really starts to shine. Either way, love it or hate it, there's no denying the game is graphically impressive for a Sega Saturn game. With transparency-like effects, fading of the levels instead of common 32-bit pop-up, as well as large colourful 3D environments to not only race but to explore as well. I always thought this game had it right, as Sonic and the others used their main abilities such as speed, gliding and flying to navigate the levels. I never really understood why the newer Sonic racers have him in a car when his unique selling point is running fast. Burning Rangers is developed by the legendary Sonic team, but at this point I don't know how they were still going by that name, as they hadn't managed to do one original Sega Saturn Sonic game in years. The game uses an optimised version of Sonic Team's Night into Dream game engine. The basic game premise is to put out fires and save people. It's a minor miracle the game runs on the Sega Saturn. They threw every graphical effect they could think of into the game, like transparency effects, complex lighting and a voice navigation system. The game did have occasional frame rate and glitching, but it's a fantastic experience overall, with large and vibrant 3D environments to explore. Although like many of the late Sega Saturn games, due to low sales, they've gone up in price quite a lot these days. And speaking of expensive games, Panzer Dragoon Saga in Europe and America is now exceedingly expensive. The game takes all the good elements of the original two and places them in a 3D RPG that was a technical marvel at the time. The game starts out with small areas which direct you, but soon opens out into massive 3D environments. Most sections are played on the Dragon, but there are also traditional RPG exploring on land sections. The game spans a massive 4 discs, but only lasts around 16 hours. Although this is an epic story, the graphics do look aged now, but at the time they looked cutting edge for a home console RPG. With massive boss characters to battle, one of the best features of the game is its excellent battle system, with the player moving around enemies to position themselves in safe positions in their enemies' weak spots. There was one other developer creating 3D wonders on the Sega Saturn at the end, as well as Sega, and that was Lobotomy Software, who used the excellent Slave Drive engine used in Exhumed to do the impossible and compare top PC games Duke Nukem and Quake to the Sega Saturn, with many people preferring the Sega Saturn version of Duke Nukem to the N64 and PlayStation counterparts. In typical Sega Saturn form, you wait ages for the top RPG and 2 come along at once, with China Force 3 boasting great graphics and effects, but unfortunately in the West we only got Part 1 as an official release. 3 games that threatened to prove once and for all the Sega Saturn could outperform the PlayStation and possibly the N64 in 3D games were Sonic Adventure Saturn, Virtua Fighter 3 and Virtua Fighter RPG, later known as Shenmue. All games were started on the Sega Saturn but moved productions to the Dreamcast, so let's take a look at the Saturn's unrealized games. There are many reasons the Saturn wasn't the worldwide success it could have been, but certainly one of the more strange decisions was Sonic not starting as his own 3D platformer for the Saturn, especially when you consider it was a system seller on the Mega Drive. After many cancelled attempts such as Sonic Extreme were tried by development teams, Sonic Team took the reins and started doing their own Sonic game. The game got part way through development, but with the focus of Sega shifting towards the Dreamcast, Sonic Team moved the next Sonic game onto the more powerful Sega Dreamcast. However, they put Sonic World into the Sonic Jam for the Sega Saturn compilation of Mega Drive games to show the progress of their 3D Sonic for the Sega Saturn. The game looked amazing for a Saturn game, despite only being a hub world for the bonuses of the main game. It showed what could have been. It has clearly took inspiration from Mario 64, but layers such as the grass look more detailed. The game also includes water effects, sections of platforming, rings to collect and an appearance from Tails. If you haven't already, check out the channel's Sonic on Saturn and new possible Sonic on Saturn in 2018 video. All might not be lost, and we might be about to finally get an exclusive Sonic 3D platformer on the Saturn, which is absolutely amazing when you consider that the Saturn's life cycle ended over 20 years ago. And also, if you like Sonic, we've got a Sonic Adventure Dreamcast video on the channel. Series creator Yu Suzuki announced new arcade game Virtua Fighter 3 was in development for the Sega Saturn. The game used Sega's new Model 3 arcade board, and Sega themselves announced it was looking into using a 3D accelerator cartridge you insert in your Saturn to give it more power to handle the game. This video clip was released in Japan to promote the upcoming Saturn game. The game was in development at least 1 year before being cancelled, most likely to not affect the sales of the Dreamcast version. No video clips or pictures of the game were ever released, but games such as Digital Dance Mix were thought to have been used to test advanced character models in preparation for Virtua Fighter 3 Saturn. The character models look great with the moving hair and movements of the clothes, which were all used in Virtua Fighter 3. The character models also have high detail and look more lifelike, and has a good flowing movement of the joints. Also thought to have been used to test for Virtua Fighter 3 was Virtua Fighter Kids, which looked great for a Saturn game and featured backgrounds with good detail despite its cartoon appearance. Many people had doubted Virtua Fighter 3 could work on the Saturn, and while it's no doubt it would have been a downgraded version of the Model 3 arcade, games like Last Bronx had showed the Saturn could do highly detailed stages. Here is two similarly designed stages, one from Virtua Fighter 3 Dreamcast and the other one from Last Bronx Sega Saturn. The closest you can get to Virtua Fighter 3 on the Saturn is Fighter's Megamix. The Virtua Fighter characters have many of their moves from Virtua Fighter 3. It is also here where we get the best example of what Virtua Fighter 3 may have looked like on the Saturn. Both Virtua Fighter 3 and Fighter's Megamix feature similar desert stages. I believe Virtua Fighter 3 Saturn would have slightly looked improved on this, but it gives a rough look at what it could have looked like. Rumour is the Virtua Fighter 3 Saturn was finished twice, with neither version using the talked about graphics accelerator cartridge, most likely abandoned due to the high costs. Virtua Fighter 3 Saturn has become notorious due to no developer who worked on the game wanting to give any information on it. If you like Virtua Fighter, check out the channel's Virtua Fighter history and reviews for the Saturn video. The years over the Saturn's life, a game that was talked about in interviews by Sega in magazines was Virtua Fighter RPG, which went on to become Shenmue on the Dreamcast. No pictures or videos were released until Shenmue 2 came out on the Dreamcast, and by completing the game you could unlock this video of Shenmue Saturn. A lot of the game looks very similar to the Dreamcast version, although most of it is cutscenes. There are a few examples of the game being played and running. For a Sega Saturn game, the level of detail looks astounding. The system was being taken to its very limits with Shenmue Saturn. It's a game that was pushing the 32-bit hardware of the Sega Saturn to places never thought possible. In an interview when promoting Shenmue 3, Yu Suzuki said Saturn Shenmue was around 60% complete when it was moved to the Sega Dreamcast. Interestingly, scenes can be seen in this video of both Shenmue 1 and 2 running on the Saturn. Some notable differences between Saturn and Dreamcast Shenmue include downgraded graphics and polygon count on the Sega Saturn, Ryo's not wearing his jacket, just a plain white t-shirt on the Saturn version, and a simpler scene showing Ryo saving the animal from Shenmue 2. Other games rumoured for a Sega Saturn release that could have pushed the 3D hardware include Scud Racer, which was a highly speculated game to be coming to the Sega Saturn, but unfortunately it didn't end up on either the Saturn or the Dreamcast, apart from the Dreamcast development video. This game would have probably struggled on the Sega Saturn as the 3D models were highly detailed. Although if they had used the frame rate, polygon count and draw distance of Sega Rally Saturn combined with the speed and rear view mirror of Sega Touring Car Saturn, it could have been a really good port, even though it would have been scaled down. Would be absolutely amazing if the upcoming Shenmue 3 was to feature some new unlockable Sega Saturn Shenmue content, and hopefully one day we'll get some new information or a leak of the Virtua Fighter 3 Saturn game. If you're a big fan of Shenmue, check out the channel's Shenmue Let's Play videos. The channel is also doing news updates about the upcoming Shenmue 3, and there's obviously the great news about Shenmue 1 and 2 HD coming out soon. If you've liked this video, give it a like. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. We've got loads of videos mainly on Saturn and Dreamcast, but also other retro and model computers. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you soon. Bye!